Okay, now with us in the studio is the Deputy General Secretary, Textile Workers, and he's Ismail Bello. It's good to have you in the studio right now.
It's my pleasure to be here.
You're welcome.
Good morning, sir.
Right. And joining us from Kaduna this morning on Skype is John Femi Adi. He is a former textile industry employee. John, it's good to have you on this morning.
Yes, thank you very much for having me on the program.
All right. And from our Abuja studio, we have John Odah now. He'll be joining us on this segment. He is a former General Secretary of the Nigeria Labour Congress. John, it's good to have you on TVC Breakfast.
All right.
Okay. I guess he couldn't hear me yet, but let's start off somehow. Now, let me start with you, Ismail. The textile industry, it's common knowledge in the 80s, in the 70s, and maybe a little part of the early 90s. It was very vibrant. In fact, it was almost rubbing shoulders with the oil industry, as the case may be. What happened?
You already, I'm sure you've researched the area very well. In the 70s and the 80s, a lot of hope. Perhaps the main driver of the manufacturing sector, the biggest sector after government in terms of employment. Over 500,000 Nigerians directly employed. When you factor that other people who live on the industry, you'll be talking about 2-3 million people living on the textile industry around those period. But 1997 marked a turning point. Nigeria liberalized textile trade under the Abacha regime. We became signatories to the WTO agreement, which meant that the country needed to open up its market. And I had Mr. Olaruwaju, a key player, who was former Director General of the textile employer, saying that had an almost immediate dramatic impact on the industry in terms of heavy influx of fabrics into the country. And at a time that the industry itself was already aging, at a time that the industry itself needed turnaround. So you can imagine the damaging impact of opening up your market when you are not prepared to play in the world. More so that industry had relied heavily on the local market in terms of the kind of textile that we produced.
I'm so glad you're wearing an Ankara really for
it's made in Nigeria. It's made in Ikentex.
Okay.
In Ikorodu. But you talk about counterfeiting. In recent time, smuggling and counterfeiting has really knocked down the industry. What is counterfeiting? It means that people steal this design that is made here in Nigeria, they take it somewhere in Asia, and in a couple of weeks it's back in the market.
All right, let's bring...
This goes for like 3,000, you bring a counterfeit, it goes for like 1.5, 1.2, 1.3. So they play on the price in an economy that is really struggling, and that's really a big burden for our industry, given that the cost of production locally is very heavy.
Okay.
Electricity issue is there, cost of funding is there, forex.
We'll take a look at some of those things.
There are quite a lot of bottlenecks in terms of local production.
Okay.
And so our competitiveness is already very diminished by the local operating environment. So it's very difficult to cope, with imported fabrics.
Mr. Bello, let's bring in Mr. John Femi Adi here, right in from Kaduna. Many thanks for joining us on TVC Breakfast. Mr. Adi, our guest in the studio, of course, has blamed, like other experts, blamed the WTO agreement. But years afterwards, why isn't Nigeria coming out of that particular calamity, as it were?
Thank you very much. It's quite a simple thing. Nigeria actually signed some bilateral agreements and multilateral agreements with multilateral companies all over the world. But the problem basically is the inability of the federal government to put the right economic policies in place. We don't go into an agreement when you don't have the right policies in place to ensure that we are not shortchanging the process of the agreement. This is the problem we have. Nigeria, before the WTO agreement signed and other agreements signed, before we opened our market for importation and for transactions between countries that have developed economies and that of us who are then on that developing, there was no policy put in place to ensure that our companies here were protected. This is the major problem we had. So we had influx of importation. We had very serious problem with smuggling. Nobody was addressing that problem. Nobody was addressing the problem of importation. We had problem of power interruption, or power, let me say, inability to provide enough power to power these companies. We had a problem with LPFO in the company, which powers the boilers. And then you don't have supply of, what, I could say would be the engine room of the textiles. So eventually the problem we had was that the companies were not able to cope with the cost of production. It was so high, and then some of them had started to go. I remember earlier before 1994, we had about close to about 60 textile mills all over Nigeria. But today, as I speak to you, if we have, it should not be more than, say, 10 or 15. Virtually in the north, we have only United Textile Company still thriving for some technical reason. The reason being that they could perhaps, they produce here, and I gather reliably that what they produce here is exported. It's not sold within Nigeria. What you see as vegetable wax today is produced by UNTL and exported, not for Nigerian market, but for foreign market. So they could survive. But for the likes of KTL, the likes of Arawa Textile Mill, the likes of Jessica Textile Mill Bombay, where I worked, the problems were basically high cost of production, and the proprietors were feeling we can't continue to produce when we cannot make profit. For a businessman, the essence of establishing the company is to make profit. And when I can't make profit, I can't, because I want to create jobs for people, and the government is not there to help me create the job. Then what do? The best thing is to just allow the government to do what it does. Honestly, the problem is the wrong economic policies put in place. And until the federal government does that, whatever money that is put into the textile mills in form of bailout today would not work. 100 billion was earmarked. As I speak to you, I gather reliably that 60 billion has been disbursed. Tell me, how many textile mills have been able to draw from them? We don't know. How has it impacted on the economy? We don't know. 60 billion in the life of an economy of a nation is not a small money. We should have been seeing this translated into reviving some of this comatose industry that before now had employed over 600,000 Nigerians directly and employed over 5 million thereabouts. Because I was part of it before. I worked in Jessica Textile Mill Bombay Kano when the textile mill in the country were thriving. And I could remember then, before in your background, I gathered you said it was second to the oil industry. For me, in the 70s, the textile mill was like more of an oil industry. It was number one highest employer and number one income generating organization for individuals.
All right.
Virtually everybody wanted to work in the textile mill. I had a cousin who was supposed to work in any KRP Kaduna, but preferred to work at the textile because then it was perhaps the highest paying job in the country before the oil started coming towards the late 80s. That is the fact.
All right, Mr. Adi, thank you. Let's bring John Odah in here now. We'll need to hear the labor side. As it is now, the textile industry only perhaps absorb about 30,000 workers. Is that about 20,000 workers? That's the information we get now. How sorry really is that situation for the Nigerian Labour Congress and the TUC?
Okay, thank you. I hope you hear me because I could hardly hear what the gentleman from Kaduna was saying. But I think we should just go back from what Bello said with respect to the way Nigeria entered or signed the WTO agreement, and this was during the Abacha period. Now, if we had good technical negotiators, we would have, like India, been able to protect our comparative advantages, what we consider our national comparative advantages. And where you have the textile sector, which is the sector apart from government that provide the single largest employment about 2-3 decades back. this ought to have been protected. But unfortunately, the Abacha government had only 12 exemptions and then went on to sign this agreement to the detriment of the country. Whereas while countries like India was negotiating its entry into the WTO, they had well over 212 exemptions. But be that as it may, we didn't even plan for the 10-year moratorium within which this agreement was going to come into force. And as a result of our lack of futuristic planning, we then have the type of situation where all manners of things are being dumped on this country, and our textile industry is on its knees. But I want to rapidly move back to the effort by the Obasanjo administration, where they conceived about the 100 billion intervention fund in the textile industry. This was eventually actualized during the Yar'Adua administration. The question we want to ask is what happened, how was that fund disbursed, and what happened to the textile employers who took that money ostensibly to modernize their factories, and at the end of the day we've not seen any tangible result out of that. One's gut feeling is that just like in the aviation sector, where the owners of airlines collected this money and diverted it to other private use, we had the type of situation that we have in the textile industry. Clearly, in a country where unemployment is in such a big problem, our governments, especially the northern governments where textile manufacturing was thriving in the First Republic, ought to have paid more attention to the revival of the industry, ought to have done much more than they have done. By the time I went to the news, I think about 12 or 13 years ago, I did a project on the textile industry and its impact on national development. And by that time, less than 27% of the clothes we wear in the country was being produced by Nigeria. So just like you have a situation where we import virtually all the things, and Nigeria does not have its own shipping line. That is, it ran its shipping line down, and therefore all the jobs in that sector and the billions that come from the shipping industry goes to some other countries. We now have a situation where a teeming population that is now reaching 200 million cannot clothe itself, cannot boast for up to 20% of the clothes that are produced for it to clothe itself. And these are part of the misplacement of priority of our political leadership. We will always come back to this point about political leadership, because where you do not have people that have vision on how to make progress, on how to build on what their predecessors, the Sadwanas, the Awolowos, the Akintolas did, you then have the type of crisis that we have right now. So from the point of view of organized labor, this is one of the very unfortunate Nigerian tragic stories, and we hope that the new administration, which says it is hoping to change the Nigerian landscape and make things to work better, will pay more attention to the revival of the textile industry. Smuggling, again, is something that if our law enforcement agencies do their work, we'll be able to curtail the devastating impact of this.
All right, John, we'll come back to you shortly after now. Now let's take a look. Now, Nigeria's textile industry was one of the booming subsectors of the economy in the post-independence years. Now, Fed by locally grown cotton and with huge demand for clothing by a fast-growing population, it provided employment to hundreds of Nigerians for several decades. But this is not the case anymore. Let me take you to my wall as usual. Let's have a better understanding of how these things played out until now. Now, the Kaduna textile industry, let my producers give me this. Let's see. Fine, good. Now, the Kaduna textile industry, the Kaduna textile mill was the first modern textile mill established in 1956. And by 1981, the textile industry had grown to become the largest and the oldest manufacturing subsector in the country. Now, the sector recorded an annual growth of about 67% between 1985 and 1991, employing about 25% of the workforce in the manufacturing industry. Now, if we move on now, we certainly see that some of the textile companies that enjoyed the boom then include the Kaduna Textile Limited, the Arewa Textile PLC, United Nigerian Textile PLC, Nortex Nigerian Limited, and Finetex Nigeria Limited. But the story changed in the early 90s when the sector took a massive dive and most of the factories went under due to the hostile work environment. Now, if we move on other textile firms that closed down after the earlier set include the international textile industry, the factories in Isolo and Ikorodu, that's in Lagos, both in Lagos, and the First Spinner Limited, also in Lagos with about 800 employees at that time. And it says Reliance Textile Lagos with about 500 employees have also folded. The list also includes Fahib Dayak in Kano with more than 1,000 people sent into the labor market, and Atlantic Textile Mill also in Lagos with about 800 people losing their job. All right, now the loss of jobs in this sector hit about 100,000 when the largest textile company in the country, United Textile Mill in Kaduna, closed down, forcing about 5,000 people into the labor market. Now, the collapse of the industry was driven largely by the smuggling at the borders, failed government policies, high cost of doing business arising from high-priced raw materials, energy cost, and a plethora of challenges which plagues the investment climate in Nigeria. Now, let's look at some of the major problems that killed Nigeria's textile industry. Now, the WTO, that's the World Trade Organization, stopped allocation to member countries to subsidize production costs. It's one of those, and they went into agreements in textile clothing. Chief of them was that all allocations on textile and clothing will be removed among WTO member states. That's World Trade Organization. We talked about that with our guests earlier on. Now, the main beneficiary of the policy was China, and the global textile market is said to be worth more than $400 billion at present. Now, according to China Customs, the export value of China's textile and garment alone amounted to about $206 billion. That's a huge amount of money, if you ask me. Now, if we move on now, the Nigerian textile industry was one of those that suffered because of the cheap exports from China. And Nigeria used to be the major supplier of good quality wax-resistant textile, what you call Ankara right now. But certainly if we move on, we see that in the early 2000s, cheap imitations of those products were produced and exported from China to West Africa, slapped with Made in Nigeria labels and smuggled into Nigeria. Some of our guests had mentioned that earlier on. Now, investigations reveal that Nigeria imports about 300 billion naira worth of textiles and garments annually, according to the National Union of Textile, Garment and Tailoring Workers of Nigeria. Now, if we move on to have a better understanding of this, I talked about the smuggling, and Nigeria's annual textile production is worth about 40 billion naira, and that's have also shown that the most of the substandard textile goods in the country, which are mostly from China, India, and Pakistan, are smuggled into the country from neighboring countries.
And the import duties, of course, are lost when those goods are smuggled in. I think if you probably go for we have about 75 million naira annually that is lost to such nefarious activities of people who smuggle in. But perhaps the question should be, what is SON doing? Maybe you want to answer that question for us. The Standard Organization of Nigeria says they are doing a lot. Just even last week that they impounded some smuggled textile into the country.
I think it's not just limited to looking at what SON should do. I think from the discussion so far, everybody seems to know what is wrong with the Nigerian textile industry. I think what we should focus on is, where do we go from here? What should we do to reposition the industry? And we are very expectant that the Buhari administration has already raised the hope that one of its cardinal focus will be on industry and job creation. And as a union, we're extremely very excited. And we've been part of that process. Luckily, the vice president, who is mandated to look at key areas of the economy, the union paid him a visit and he made a commitment. He was going to pay particular attention to the problem of the industry. It's a well-researched area. There are several documents. There are several policy documents. There's the NIRP, the Nigerian Industrial Revolution Plan. There is the Cotton Textile Garment Subsector Policy Document. So there is enough material to work with. And he had already directed and set up a committee headed by the Minister of State.
How long has the committee been on? About a year now?
My General Secretary Committee, just a couple of months.
Couple of months?
Yes, couple of months. So the idea is these ingredients, these policy components, how do we activate them? How do we get them moving? So the committee is working, and we're very hopeful that these critical areas, including what should SON be doing, what should custom be doing, you know, to check the influx of goods. These goods, they don't even pay duties on them. They don't pay levies on them. So they come in free. There's no way you can compete with the arrays of baggage, of cost that you have to be as a local producer. So there's a lot of problems. So if those areas are checked, then there is hope that the industry can regain the market gradually. As you said, it's about 10-12% of the market that the industry is controlling. If you can push and the industry takes over 30% of the market, 40% of the market, we can gradually improve the production capacity of the industry, create more jobs, and then the industry begin to look up again.
All right, let me bring John Femi Adi in Kaduna here now. You are in Kaduna. We hear that the governor of the state is trying to revive or to assist some of the, or stimulate activity in some of these textile industries there. Can you give us a picture of what the governor is doing differently, if he has started doing anything?
What the governor is basically doing is to create the right environment and get the problems, get to know how and where the problem started from, and then know where and how they go. Basically, one of the problems I think he identified is the issue of infrastructure, the issue of power, and then he's working to ensure that the 30 megawatts to be evacuated from the dam there in Kaduna here will be upstream into the industrial areas, so that the industries will have, you know, enough power supply to power the economy. Because that's one of the problems, the reason identified for the initial collapse of textile industries in Kaduna. There was no adequate supply of power. There was no LPFO, what they call the black oil. You know, you don't have the right environment. You know, the tax policy of the state is being reviewed. In the past, we used to have, you know, multi-dimensional system of collecting tax in the state. You have the local government, you have the state government, you have the federal government, you have other, you know, undertone that you have, you know, embedded in the tax policy of the state. What the government is trying to do is to harmonize, you know, and have one tax system that would, you know, benefit the industries or industrial managers to the extent that they can have, you know, some form of rebate. It's doing that, and it's trying to ensure that, like I told you, you could upstream, see how they can generate funds, you know, using the state government to actually get funds to stream. Currently, it's only United Textile Things that is still working. ATL is gone, Arewa Textile is gone, Finetex is gone, Nortex is gone.
All right.
We have Telco still, but altogether there are stakeholders meeting every day, meeting to ensure that they come back on board and see how they can create jobs. The essence of that is to create jobs for the people of Kaduna State, and that is what the government is doing.
Okay. Now, Ismail Bello is with us in the studio. We're discussing this with John Femi Adi in Kaduna, joining us on Skype, and John Odah, the former General Secretary of the NLC in our Abuja studio. Let's go in for the news update for the time. IK standing by to give us all of that, and then we come back to dwell on this because it has been on the interest of so many Nigerians for all of these industries to come back, because when it comes to manufacturing industry, the textile industry in Nigeria used to be #1. So bringing it back now in the face of all the other challenges is one thing Nigerians would like to see. IK, is all of yours now. Take it. All right, thanks for joining us on TVC Breakfast. If you've been watching, we've been discussing the textile industry in Nigeria and ways to reviving the industry. And certainly we have with us in the studio Ismail Bello. He's the Deputy General Secretary of Textile Workers. And we have in Kaduna joining us a former employee of the textile industry, John Femi Adi. And we have in our Abuja studio, John Odah, the former General Secretary of the Nigeria Labour Congress, joining us. Now, John Odah, let me come to you in Abuja there. Now, the issue of power supply has been identified as one of the major challenges facing the textile industry. We still have this challenge right now. So as a way of bringing back the industry, how will it thrive even if monies are invested bringing back the manufacturing industry? How will it survive in the face of the challenges in power?
Well, I heard you a bit of the way, but I understand you talking about the problem of power and how does it affect the efforts at revival of the textile industry. This is precisely part of the problem, the inconsistencies over the years of government program and policies. There is no way this country is going to make any progress in terms of industrialization when it has not addressed the issue of power. And it is addressing it in the most, in a wrong way, to put it very mildly. All over the place, all over the world, the experience we've had is that government at every point in time had to invest heavily in the power sector to bring its industries into national limelight. We've had a situation where since 1999, successive governments have been trying to increase our national power outlay to up to 4,000-5,000. And this completely is nothing compared to, take for example, South Africa that has over 40,000 of electricity generation. So if this country is serious about going out of its crisis and pushing forward with industrialization, government have to spend money in fixing the power sector. But what we have had is that governments over this period, and the man in charge of Kaduna State now was one of those who was really an obstacle when the Obasanjo administration was there, because he was insisting that they should privatize the power sector. And it was only in the tail light of Obasanjo's going that government realized that this privatization of the power sector was not going to help in bringing the type of revival that this country needed. And by the time Obasanjo started investing in this, time was up for him after his failed effort at third term. So we must, as a nation, fix our energy thing in such a way that we will be competitive. Compare with our neighbors like Ghana. The cost of doing business, the cost of production of our manufacturing is several times higher because of the amount of resources that goes into alternative power generation.
Okay.
So we need to concretely address this, and this is not going to be addressed by the auctioning as the Jonathan administration did of what was remaining of the electricity corporation to political hanger-ons who have absolutely no experience and nothing to bring on the table as far as electricity generation is
all right,
concerned.
Mr. Odah.
That's the reason why we...
All right. Okay. Let's perhaps bring Mr. Bello in here. There are quite a number of allegations that even Mr. Odah himself raised about diversion of funds. That even the 10 billion naira, 100 billion naira that was released in 2010, and that's at times perhaps that diversion. Do you have a grouse with your colleague over there, where even if there are such allegations, why is it not in the open?
Two quick areas that I will look at. I will look at funding and I will look at power. On the issue of funding, I think it's open, it's transparent for the sector. You may say it's not adequate. You may say it's not perfect, but I don't think there are cases of diversion. Lending takes some time, which is not really good for the immediate need of the industry.
And is it 6%? The 6% interest rate on that?
There are issues that we engage. But there was also a time they gave a midterm report of the impact of that funding. About 60% of it is disbursed. There are companies that have taken it. UNT closed in 2007. It was reopened in 2010, courtesy of CTG funding. Over 1,000 workers reabsorbed. So, I mean, in terms of its impact, there's no doubt about it. But it's not sufficient, it's token. Okay. So that's the issue. We could do better. In fact, $100 billion itself is token to revamp a sector like textile. So there are several issues that we can raise, but I don't think there are cases of diversion. That is that with regards to funding. And part of the recent committee, part of the area they are looking at is first, how do they expand even the 100 and address the bottlenecks associated with lending. That BOI need to remove that, and also deal with the issue of interest. That it could come down a little more moratorium, so that people will have opportunity.
Do you think that this is feasible in this economy of today, where you want to reduce the interest from 6% 2010?
There are several areas to mobilize cheap funding. There's already a 1% levy on textile, which the industry stakeholders are saying that the customs should release, and it can be passed through the BOI for technology upgrade. If you release a levy collected at the port to BOI, then they can even possibly give it at 0 or possibly 1.5%. So it's possible. We just need to be creative about how we mobilize resources. Then on power, there are two sides. There is the sustainable side through the national grid. A lot of problems, privatization, a lot of issues. Over the last decade, Nigeria has over between 3,000 and 5,000 megawatts for 170 million people. That's serious power poverty. Serious power poverty. A country like South Africa with about 50 million people, 40,000 megawatts. 40,000 megawatts. So you can see the gap is huge. But how do you fill that gap? Do you wait until you are able to generate sufficient in the national grid? No. There are issues about how do you make FPFO possible, like the gentleman from Kaduna raised. A lot of factories in the north rely on FPFO. What is FPFO? It's a waste product from refinery. Our refineries are not working. So these problems are interconnected. Once the refineries work, FPFO is like a waste product. So it should sell cheap to industries. They can use it to power their boilers. For those of us in Lagos area, we rely on gas because many of the factories are connected to gas. As you speak, there's a lot of problem for the industries operating in Lagos area, arising from pipeline vandalization and all of those things that is happening in the Niger Delta.
Yes.
So there are issues. There's also the issue of cost of gas. International price of gas is about $2.38 per cubic meter. In Nigeria, it's sold for 7.38 per cubic meter, far higher than even the international price. So a lot of stakeholders in the industry are saying, look, you give concession to the cement factories, give the similar concession to textile factories in terms of pricing for gas. So there are those will be the immediate issues in terms of addressing the power challenge. But on a sustainable basis, Nigeria must overcome its power poverty and get its power right.
All right. Now, some of the information we were giving out earlier on, certainly the Adams Oshomole is a pioneer major reforms in the textile industry. Remember what the roles he performed when he was in the textile industries in the north. And now he's the governor of Edo State and is seen as one of the pioneers of those who led reforms in that industry. Now, another one of the challenges we want to talk about is the issue of urbanization. Now, I'd like to direct this question to Femi in Kaduna, but before I come to you, Femi, moving on, in 2009, the government of late President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua set up the 100 billion naira intervention fund for the textile industry, managed and disbursed by the Bank of Industry. Now, our guest talked about that earlier on. Sadly, the fund didn't bring the textile industry back into its former glory. Now, President Muhammadu Buhari has put plans in place to revive the ailing industry and deliver 3 million jobs to unemployed Nigerians. But let me go to the basics, Femi. You are in Kaduna. When we talk about raw materials that are supposed to feed some of these industries, we know that there has always been a complaint of many Nigerians leaving the agricultural industry, leaving those background industries into oil and looking for white-collar jobs and all of that. But how available is raw materials right now if those industries have to come back upstream?
You see, these are some of the issues I was trying to raise initially, that the right economic policies has to be put in place to encourage first, the revival of these industries. And amongst them is the issue of agriculture. As it is today in the north, not only in Kaduna State, you have had a lot of farmers, migrated from farming to hangers-on within the oil industry. You go to KRPC Kaduna, you have those who are supposed to be in the rural areas farming, are hanging around the refineries as I wouldn't know, just to hang on, maybe get 1 or 2 things from people who are loading and offloading. These are some of the problems. People have abandoned farming. They have taken to either Okada, Achaba, bus driving, begging, a lot of ills that is associated with the urban problem. And this very serious. Even if the textile mill today will be restreamed back on board, the problem we will have is that there will be no raw materials to feed this textile mills. So we'll still go back to relying on importation of raw materials, which will be very detrimental to reviving this country. So until something is done to return these farmers back to farm and then start producing, then we still have a long way to go. Very critically, this has to be done with the deliberate policies from both the state government and the federal government. I'm surprised. The president today is from the north. I want to believe he understands the problem better than those who are from the south. In the north here, an average northerner, I'm sorry to say, does not believe in education. They are mostly farmers and other things they do. I was expecting the president first thing to do is to place priority on agriculture, basically farming, which is the largest employer of labor. As I'm concerned, I've not seen any sector that has employed more than, and that can employ more than. As I speak, I'm still saying that agriculture as it is still the highest, job creating unit of every sector as far as I'm concerned. And until something is done to return people to base to farm, we are not going to, because if United Textile is working today, where is the cotton from? We used to have cotton in those days produced from Biu. We used to have Namude cotton. We used to have Zaria cotton. These were good staples that are long compared to Brazilian cotton that were imported then for mix. So how do you tell me that on your way to Zaria in those days, if you are traveling between Kaduna and Zaria, you see a lot of cotton farms. Where are they? Today there are no cotton farms in Kaduna. If you go to Funtua, you see cotton farm as you're leaving Kaduna to Funtua. Where are the cotton farms? If you go to Biu, somewhere in Borno and other places, Gombe, you see a lot of cotton farms. Where are they? So if you are talking about reviving, one of the factors considered for production is the cotton. Where's the cotton? Now we have to rely on cotton. It is expensive to import. That is the truth.
Okay, Mr. Adi, okay. We would like to go to Abuja studio now. Briefly, Mr. John Odah, just like in few seconds, you remember the Mr. Adams Oshomole's struggle in the 1969 about the welfare of the textile workers. What is the NLC? I know you are no longer, of course, you're still very much involved. What is NLC doing right now as regards the welfare of those who are no longer absorbed by the textile industry? Just briefly, sir.
Well, I had you only up to some point, unfortunately. But yeah, I can make the point that during the time Adams was president of the NSC, coming from the background of being general secretary of the textile union, he had a lot of insight into the problems, having worked in that sector virtually all his life before he became president of the NSC. And that informed the level of advocacy which the NSC and the textile union did with respect to the revival of the industry. And then, and I think the textile union, to be fair to them, still continued the advocacy around informing Nigerians and critical sectors like the customs, the standard organization and others about the negative impact of some of the things that were being done, smuggling and bringing in of some standard goods into the country. And I do know that the union had a number of campaigns around the need to keep on the agenda the issue of industrialization and manufacturing, which the textile sector is part of, is been a key part of industrialization, as you said in
All right.
Studio,
All right, John.
80s.
All right, John. Thank you very much for talking to us on TVC Breakfast. John Odah is the former General Secretary of the Nigeria Labour Congress. And we also thank you, John Femi Adi, for joining us from Kaduna. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
That's all right.
Yeah, we
Now-
have two Johns gone now.
Yeah,
but we have Mr. Bello left
We
with
still have
us
Ismail.
in the studio.
Yeah.
All right, so.
As we get along, this is not the government is trying to earmark monies, look for ways of reforming and bringing back or stimulating activities in the textile industry. This is not the first time that has happened. Previous governments have done that. What should change about bringing this earmarked committee, this into reality? What should change?
I think what should change is the government commitment. What should change is the government willingness to act on these issues. And that's why I said the sector is well researched. In 2003, UNIDO was commissioned to do a study. There was a review in 2008-2009. Under Minister Olusegun Aganga, there was a well-researched document on Nigeria Industrial Revolution Plan. There was one for the textile subsector. And we believe there are quite a lot of cogent.
So there's good knowledge of the challenges already.
Exactly. And that's why it gladdens our heart that the VP has said, look, go look at these documents and let's look at actionable issues that the government can act on immediately. We hope that the committee will finish its job as quickly as possible. And so, as a union, we can begin to put pressure on government on those areas that have been agreed by stakeholders.
All right.
Because we believe that nothing will happen except to keep the fire burning. And as a union, we will do that.
What do you think about genetically modified cottons? Some experts are advocating for it, that some of these cottons are infected by insects and all that would be a better deal for the industry, do you believe?
The best deal would be for government and the several agencies, particularly the Ministry of Agriculture, to look at what will work for Nigeria. It's important because what works elsewhere may not necessarily work in our community. And there are a lot of, if you look at the cotton textile garment policy, it's a chain from cotton to textile to garment. And in cotton, you do spinning, you do weaving before you get your cloth. Nigeria did it in the 80s, during SAP era. There was a big bang, there was a major issue, and the industries returned back to farm. He said so in Funtua, in Malumfashi, around the northern area. UNT had farms, Aprint had farms, they were growing cotton, and it was bringing back the industry. We were getting strong on spinning, which is to turn the cotton yarn into spindles, into tiny threads, which you turn to woven cloth. So we need to look at our own agricultural sector, and that's why what the government is currently doing is really good. They are trying to build synergies across the different sectors. I mean, across the different departments and agencies of government that are responsible for this policy.
Keep the chain rolling.
To keep SON, DOI, Nigerian Export Promotion Council,
Ismail.
so that it becomes an holistic approach, to reviving our sector.
All right, Ismail Bello, Deputy General Secretary, Textile Workers, thank you for joining us in TVC Breakfast.
Thank you for coming and like the Ankara again.
No, it's good.
It's a nice
Made in Nigeria, buy Nigeria, buy made in Nigeria.
That's great.
It's good.
That's great.
Thank you.